Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about this. This is a package that comes from Turkey, specifically from a couple of guys known as the Bahar Bros. That name might sound very familiar because I've been talking about them and their wonderful products on my channel for a number of years now. Specifically what these guys focus on are VGA and HDMI boxes for the Sega Dreamcast. More or less you can think of them as devices you connect to the Dreamcast so that you can use them on a modern television and have them look much better. This bears a little bit of explanation, it requires, I think, to people who perhaps are not familiar with this. The Dreamcast, most of us remember it, at least in its heyday, as just supporting 480i through Composite, not for looking all that great, but whatever. Turns out, of course, the Dreamcast actually had a high resolution mode in it that could be accessed through a VGA device. Sega built that right in. Now, VGA boxes have existed basically since the beginning of the Dreamcast, but they really were not very common. Over time, they basically got more and more common as people wanted to tap into that, and now we're all the way up to the point where people make third-party ones that actually use HDMI, which is amazing. The Dreamcast is capable of a 480p image signal. Now, that's it. It's not going to get any higher than that, at least not natively. And most games support it. The thing with the Dreamcast that people don't tend to know or remember is that the Dreamcast actually had around 800 titles released. Now that does include the professionally pressed independent games, of which there's like 30, but most of the games actually come from Japan only. In the US we got 248, Europe had a bunch that we didn't have, something like 24 that we didn't have, and then Japan had a whole fuck ton that neither region, obviously Europe's not a country, but you know, either region ever had. Point is, there's around 800 titles for the Sega Dreamcast, and the vast majority of them support the high resolution 480p modes, and if you were to connect a VGA box or something very similar to what's in this, you would be able to tap into that. Now that said, there are some oddballs. Now those oddballs will actually all be listed in the description of this video. You can simply think of them as games that are not compatible with the VGA high resolution modes. And now of those, there's about 98. But here's the kicker, about half of that 98 are actually compatible if you force it. Now there's two ways to do that. One is some devices like this actually have a button right on it that allows you to go between the two options. It'll start in the mode that it can support, and then at the right time in the boot sequence you flip a switch and then it will go into the higher resolution mode. The alternate version, which to be honest is the one I use, is the software method. In particular, I use software called Codebreaker. Codebreaker, I've even done a whole video on that. It's basically a boot disk and a cheat disk, but it has the added bonus of also being able to enable the VGA mode into games that do not support it. But keep in mind, again, description of this video will contain every single game that is not VGA compatible, and it's split into two sections. One, which is games that you can force to boot into VGA mode, as previously mentioned, and the other half of it is games that absolutely, no matter what you do, you will never get into VGA mode. I believe there's 48 of those that will never work. So please understand that before perhaps buying one of these, check that list. If the game's not on that list, you should be good to go. Now, in the past, as I've mentioned, Bahar Bros has released devices like this. This one here specifically is known as the Akura. Now I did a whole video on this as well. This is a great device. All you do is connect it to the back of your Dreamcast, connect an HDMI cable to it, bada bing, bada boom, you're using HDMI out of the Dreamcast. It just taps straight into the signal. It's very clean, very pure, and just passes it along through. It even adds a couple of little bonus features. One, as I mentioned, it has that swapping method so that you can actually try and get those games to work. But as I said, I don't actually prefer that method. I prefer the software method because it tends to work more consistently. I never get the timing right, but it's nice that it's there. The other things it has is it has a scan line generator built into it. Then it has the option to adjust the thickness of those scan lines. Also a feature that I've been very clear in the past I really don't care about, I don't use. And then another one is the vivid or dark mode, or I should say normal mode, image quality option. Again, that's kind of nice to tinker with, but really never something I practically used. That said, I mostly had it in passive mode. I would disable all of those things and I would just kind of use it the way it is. And this is, without a doubt, the way I hook up my Dreamcast. This is how I play my Dreamcast games, is through this box, because it is awesome. I can't recommend it enough. However, it did have its downsides. It's a little bit big, it's a little bit bulky, it's not the most aesthetically pleasing thing ever, though it certainly does exactly what it's supposed to do. But the price is the thing that really hurt most people. This thing cost $85 shipped from Turkey. And that's, you know, to be somewhat expected. It's handcrafted by a couple of dudes, but it's still awesome, and I really highly recommend it. That said, there has been later competition. There is a newer device called the Pound, by a company called Pound, that released the Dreamcast HDMI cable. Now, to be fair, I have not used this cable yet, but a lot of reviews and a lot of people I know personally who have had access to it all kind of say it's meh at best, which to be honest does not surprise me. It's a mass-produced device from a Chinese company, or at least was mass-produced in China, probably not the best engineering. Now that said, I have not used it. I am willing to give it a shot, and at some point I will be doing a video on it. But people like it because it's much cheaper. It's $30. Well, the Bahar Bros are back, and it's time for them to get a little bit more competitive, hence this box. So I'm going to open it up, and look, a knife, not a pair of scissors. So let's see how quickly that works, because for years everybody's like, dude, get a knife or get a box cutter. Well, I couldn't find my scissors, hence we're using this, but I still don't own a box cutter in the traditional sense. But let's get inside here and see what they included. All right, one side down, and don't cut your fingers, although maybe you guys want me to cut my fingers, I never really know. Some people say they don't want me to use the scissors because they think I'm going to cut my fingers, and then other people say, go ahead and cut your fingers. But anyway, so we got through that, and we're inside, and we've got a lot of foam packaging here, a nice box there, and this, what is this? And then just more foam packaging. So we'll put that off to the side, and we'll open probably this thing first. Get right in there, because I don't know which is which. I think they threw a bonus in here, and I'm going to take a look at it before we proceed, just to make sure I know exactly what it is. Yes. All right, this is totally irrelevant. This has nothing to do with anything. This is a jar of sorrel. If you've watched my Bahar Bros videos in the past, you know they always tend to do this. This is essentially the real version of Nutella. Nutella's like the mass-produced, not nearly as good version. The authentic stuff comes straight from Turkey, and this is it, and it's good. I know I shouldn't be eating it, but dude, man, like I think my first Instagram post ever was me like being sad holding this because it was empty. So dude, guys, Bahar Bros, thank you very much for throwing that up. The only place you can get like the legit version is Turkey. They have a version of sorrel in the UK. I've tried it. It's nowhere near as good. The stuff straight from Turkey is the best. So that's just a nice bonus. Thank you very much to the Bahar Bros. But they also sent this, of course, this box here from Bahar Bros. We're going to open it up, and it should contain exactly what I think it's going to contain, which is this little box, and get past the nice bubble wrap, which I give them credit, they package this thing very nicely so it will arrive in perfect condition. A little bit of do-it-yourself assembly, which is really not a big deal because it's easy as hell. But what you get is two things. You get this little box here, and then you get this little cable. Now the cable obviously has to go inside of the box. In fact, I think you can actually disconnect this one from the Akura and then connect it over here. Yep, that's exactly how it works. So I don't even, now I have a spare cable in case anything ever goes wrong. But yeah, you see how their stuff is kind of very compatible with their own other stuff. So yeah, there you go. It's a smaller box. Now, what exactly is this? Well, this is actually the more economical version of the Akura, and it is called the Gekko. Now, aesthetics-wise, it hasn't changed much. It's still their same basic design that they always use, but the thing that's nicer about it is that it is obviously smaller, which is nice. It will take up less space in a setup, which, while it's not like a huge difference, I will admit that this was always kind of bigger and bulkier than I would have wanted in the particular area that I have my Dreamcast. This will alleviate that problem. The other thing that it's done is that it has eliminated some of the, in my opinion, less useful features. It got rid of the scanline generators, and it got rid of that vivid or standard mode option. Again, personally, I never used either of those, so I don't miss them. The other thing they did was shave the price down. The original, the Akura, retails for $85. This one retails for $55. That is a big haircut. Now, granted, that's still more expensive than the pound cable, but again, the video quality is the difference. I personally would pay that difference. Now, I will be doing, once I get the pound cable, a more accurate test, but there are already videos out there you can see of people comparing at least the Akura to the pound cable, and the general consensus is pound cable's cheaper, which is nice, but the picture quality just isn't as good. So personally, I would splurge for the true pass-through, the true representation of Dreamcast image quality. Now, from a technical perspective, you have to understand this thing does no upscaling recording of any kind. The Dreamcast outputs 480p, so does this. So make sure whatever you connect it to also supports 480p. That can sometimes be an issue with certain TVs. Now personally, all of mine run it, all my monitors run it, but there are some out there that don't. Especially as we get into the more 4K era, there's going to be more and more that don't. But for now, just make sure that it would support that. But most computer monitors anyway would definitely support it. All right guys, so I've been using this thing for a while on our pal here, the Sega Dreamcast. Of course, this Dreamcast is a CF card modded Dreamcast with a region-free switch and a wireless controller. I've done videos on all these things, you can check them out. Adding an HDMI device to it, of course, was just logical. Granted, it already had that with the Akura, but as far as the Gekko goes, it's exactly what I expected it to be. It's the Akura, but smaller, minus a couple of features that, frankly, I never used. And I gotta be honest, I can't recommend it enough. I think it's fantastic. It's exactly what I would want. Now, if you haven't seen the Akura or ever used one, I'm sure you're very curious, what really is the difference? Well, take a look at this. Right here in this clip, you'll see on the left side you've got Crazy Taxi, and on the right side you've got Crazy Taxi. But on the left side, you've got this running through the Gekko. On the right side, you've got this running through composite cables. And I must add, you've got these running through composite cables through the FrameMeister. That's actually better on the right than most of the time composite is ever going to look. Yeah, and then compare it to the left. Keep in mind, the Gekko doesn't do anything other than tap into what's already in the Dreamcast and just give it to you in a more convenient format. That's what's in the Dreamcast naturally, and the right is what most of us were stuck with. The only criticism I have of this thing, and I don't think it's its fault, because the Akura did this, and then upon doing more research, it turns out that pound cable also does this. So this is either a limitation of the Dreamcast or is just something about how these boxes actually work. I'm not entirely sure. But here's the thing. For some reason, on some TVs and some monitors, the Dreamcast, when you display it through an HDMI device, will slightly move the game-like image to one direction or the other. And I don't know why that is, but the consequence of that is actually that usually on the right side of the screen, there will be information missing. And when I say information, I mean like an aspect of the picture. It's very noticeable if you play games like Shenmue, where Ryo's watch, the clock is there on the lower right screen. You'll always notice the clock, and then there's space after that until you eventually get to the end of the screen. But for some reason, I noticed that it would chop off a part of the watch and absolute everything to the right of it. I never figured out what that was about, because sometimes it would do it, sometimes it wouldn't. Turns out, there's a very simple solution to this. If you turn the Dreamcast on before you turn your TV on, problem solved. That's it. Turn the TV on afterwards, it won't be an issue, it'll display correctly. I had no idea. I didn't know that was a thing, but that exists in this, it exists in the Akura, it exists in the pound cable. So if you have one of those, always turn your Dreamcast on first. And keep in mind, always keep your Dreamcast controllers plugged in before you turn them on, and never disconnect while the power's on. You can pop the fuse and controllers can stop working. So the ideal setup is plug in your controller, turn on your Dreamcast, then turn on your TV. Make sure, of course, that this is how it's connected. Can't recommend it enough. I love this thing. Thank you very much to the Bahar Bros for hooking me up with this for review purposes. Thank you very much for watching, everybody, and I'll see you all later.